not have time for. Hi, everyone. Just a quick reminder, we will not have time for questions today, but we have invited Dr. Safiya Noble, and we have shared links to her books, her website, LinkedIn profile. Please follow her, buy her book, engage with her, and also we also have informal reading circles every last Fridays, led by a very own volunteer. So there's so many ways you can engage with this brilliant author, scholar, and absolutely leader in the AI ethics space, even before there was a field called AI ethics. So again, a very, very warm welcome.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. And, I love, Mia, the convening power that you have. When you ask people to show up, we all want to show up. And that's because of you. You're so committed to this community of women. And it's an honor to get to come and participate. So I'm here to talk about all the things, whatever you want to talk about. And I'm thrilled. I came in a little bit late on the last panel. I'm sorry that I missed it, but there were some good nuggets in there too. So great to be here.
Thank you so much. I so appreciate that. And it's always an honor. I'm so grateful. It's always an honor when women who are so established and so well recognized for their work in the space still take time to come back and give back. It's incredible. It's incredible, especially at this time, right? Such a different landscape from the time when we first met and your book was published. And now we have come forward to this space. So much has changed. But again, folks, if you are looking for, I just want to give a quick introduction to Dr. Safiya Noble, and we will drop links to their website so you can see all the amazing work that she has been doing for many years before AI was cool, many years before AI ethics became a thing. Um, Dr. Safiya Noble is David Osier's Presidential Endowed Chair of Social Sciences and Professor of Gender Studies, African American Studies, and Information Sciences Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. She's also the director of the Center on Digital Justice and co-director of the Minderu Initiative on Tech and Power at the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. She is currently the director of the UCLA Data X Initiative, and she leads work in critical data studies for the campus. So please download the program guide. You can get links to all her work and follow her. So without further ado, I have so many questions for you.
Let's go. All right.
Uh, so starting where you started, you published your book back in 2018. Can you help our audience understand what was the context and technology landscape then? Uh, so we start there. Like, what was it like
Yeah.
then?
It's such a great question, and it's so interesting how it seems like um, we. Oh no, did you lose me? Okay, wait.
Yes, my
Okay.
apologies. I need to.
Oh, it's okay.
I was just trying to spotlight you, and that
Oh,
was a
no
user
problem.
error. That video you should be able to,
Here
and
we
let me
go.
just pin
Here
you.
we go. We're back. All right, we're back.
User error. Yes, let me.
So,
Mm,
let's go back to 20, I don't know, 2010 or so. I was in graduate school at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. At that time, I was in grad school with other scholars that you all know, people like Sarah Roberts, who's written, as you know, about content moderation, Miriam Sweeney, who's written about, at the time, she wrote her dissertation about Miss Dewey and kind of anthropomorphized avatars, which fast forward to LLMs. I mean, she understood how consequential it would be. The three of us were these, I feel like a little bit like outlaw feminist technology studies scholars at Illinois in the Graduate School of Library and Information Science. And we were thinking about like all of these social and political and economic consequences of technology. But because we were in the iSchool at Illinois and we were, to varying degrees technical people too, we were thinking about them, let's say, a little bit orthogonally to how media studies and communication studies were scholars were thinking about them, because we were embedded in an interdisciplinary school with computer scientists, information scientists, and children's librarians, right? I mean, or librarians, and so people who were thinking about this like digital knowledge frameworks and foundations, and we were all deep embedded in that. And back then, when you would talk about the algorithm having some type of social import, this was a fairly illegible concept, quite frankly, back in 2011, 2012. I deposited my dissertation in 2012, and I still, which became the basis of the book Algorithms of Oppression. And I think about how, even citing the people like Helen Niesenbaum and Frank Pasquale and others, but how you like to say that the algorithm could have racial or gendered implications in society was really just like that was just um, completely illegible. I mean, there was not a lot of writing or scholarship. Um, there were people writing about, let's say, think about like Lisa Nakamura or Jerry Kong, writing about racism in cyberspace and in some of the ways that like the web is architected. But that was a kind of understood in a different context than, let's say, mathematical formulations. So yes, a web designer might design and mislabel or label uh, dimensions of the architecture in ways that are fraught, right? Because that's like a social, we understood that kind of sociologically. But to say that the algorithm, that the math racial, was a racial project in this way was very, very difficult. In fact, I always laugh that it was like a miracle that I found 4 people to be on my dissertation committee. And, algorithm as a word was really computer science or information scientist jargon. It was not part of our everyday lexicon back then. In fact, when I got my book contract with NYU Press, I said I want to name this book Algorithms of Oppression. And, my editor was like, absolutely not. We're not doing that. Nobody knows what an algorithm is. And I said, I promise you, they're going to know what an algorithm is before you know it. And this book is going to help people understand. But, at the time, we had such a hyper reductive way of talking about algorithms as just kind of purely math. And, in that reductive framework, um, people would say to me, math can't be racist, math can't be sexist, right? And, I think we've come a long way in being able to, and so many thousands of scholars now and journalists who are making technical dimensions, mathematical dimensions, statistical dimensions of how society is organized and how technologies are developed and designed and affect societies. I mean, we have a very, very clear understanding of that now. You'd be hard pressed to find someone who would say that an algorithm is completely apolitical. But back then, that was the argument. And I would say, I finally learned, and I would say to people, well, what we're talking about here as a metaphor is, something akin to asking a biologist, what does it mean to be human? And they're responding with, it is to be mitochondria and cells. That's not incorrect, but that's not the whole story. And that's really what I felt about how we were talking about algorithms, more than a decade ago. Yes, it's math, but that's not the whole story either. And Algorithms of Oppression, just in the dissertation and then that book, really became a way to narrate and provide evidence of the ways in which algorithms were remaking the way we understood ourselves in society. And I was really interested in doing that by studying something incredibly banal and boring, like a search engine, because I was in library school, and everybody in library school was thinking about how Google was coming to displace these other forms of knowledge organization that we had been attending to for thousands of years, called the library. And now I would say fast forward, many of our students only experience in the library is going there to sleep, right? Or to have an organized study group. It's not necessarily as like the first place to go for primary evidence. They really start in these other spaces like large language models and search. So I still care about these boring things. Of course, the fundamental logics that I was writing about back then, I think, are even more difficult to discern, but are the backbone of what we experience now with large language models. And so there's a lot of work still to be done in this space.
You're a legend. Your work is so absolutely foundational to our understanding how these algorithms work. I remember I was working at Google at the time, and I had people, the product managers and such, and they would insist, like people, even at Google, would insist that these are neutral. This is algorithm. It's all math. And people today might find it shocking, but that was very widely accepted because you don't question Google. You went up against like this multi-billion dollar company. Oh my gosh, like that is
Don't
fierce.
remind
That is,
me how terrifying that actually was. Sarah Roberts and I used
oh
to laugh because she was writing about content moderation and big companies. And we would always make the joke that if we're in a car accident of one, um, start in Mountain View
my.
looking for like, a perpetrator. But it's so strange. I mean, I didn't actually feel fearful. I really thought that, and I do believe this, that we were doing a public good. We were, scholars at public school, at Illinois, where I was on faculty, and then at UCLA, a brief stint at USC. Our job as researchers is to provide knowledge for society, and I knew, in fact, that a lot of people in industry would also benefit and have benefited, quite frankly. And so I'm grateful that, yes, no one in Mountain View ever cut my brake lines, taking on these giant companies. And I say that, like with like tongue in cheek, but it is pretty, if you think about now what it means over an arc of history to take on these big tech companies, well, the worst dimensions of things that I was most fearful of, and I wrote about in Algorithms of Oppression, especially kind of towards the end, that book was going to press just as the 2016 election results had come in, and we had elected our first authoritarian leader in the United States. And I was, and kind of the things that I was worried about then in terms of monopoly power and it being used in service of the most rights violating ways has actually come true. And so now to talk about big tech, I think is actually much more of a probably terrifying endeavor for many people around the world who live under the authoritarian regimes that big tech has facilitated coming into power.
Absolutely. It is absolutely terrifying. And one of our previous authors said, like Shannon Ballor was here this morning, and we know her, so I'll love her. Yeah,
Absolutely.
same. And she said that as an AI ethicist, we never want our words to come true, our predictions to come true, because what
That's
we're
right.
warning about becomes the reality. And you're absolutely right. And everything that's happening is as you predicted. So earlier this morning, if y'all missed it, I did share a resource we created. I started documenting the contributions of women and non-binary people in the space because right now we are in an era of erasure. They're actively at NASA, for example, NASA has been ordered to take down the mentions of women's contributions with the milestones, the first woman astronaut and people of color. They are actively rewriting history and erasing the contributions we have
That's right.
made. So we made the decision to publish it and have it out there as a document because we do not want to forget the contributions that you all have made, but also the fact that we stand on the shoulder of giants. Right now, everybody's claiming to be an expert, right? Everybody thinks they know. And I want to make sure that we give credit to the women who've done the work, And also, it is not easy. There's so much pushback, right? There's so much pushback. So can you, that was going to be my next question. Like, can you help us compare and contrast in like some specific ways that the landscape has changed? You said that a lot of things that you predicted, like maybe co-optation of, um, like the rise of the tech oligarchy, for example. Like,
Yeah.
what were the things that led us to this moment in history right now? Can you talk to us, in which you had already addressed some of these in the book?
Yeah. Well, first, I wanted to say, Mia, your work and your team is so important because you have been a documenter of the contributions of women, non-binary people, women of color, LGBTQ people, and you have been relentless about ensuring that there is visibility. And I just want to say that even doing that now in this current moment in the United States could be interpreted as illegal. Can you believe? Can you believe? So, I mean, no one could have ever imagined we would be living in the world upside down in this way. We're only 50 years, 60 years into, um, one generation truly to be born under equality, under the law, and that's actively being dismantled. So it's really shocking to
Terrifying.
me when you think about it that way. You and I were probably of the generation like Gen X who were the people who were like the first kids to go to fully integrated schools, right? And to endeavor to be raised as equals. Um, and here we are witnessing a full court press to um, dismantle all of those all of those gains. So for sure, this is an incredible moment to be living through. Um, I think there were a lot of things that this community of scholars, I think really mostly scholars and journalists, and to some degree organizers, but especially scholars and journalists, helps make legible that tech would contribute to rising authoritarianism, that tech would be fundamentally implicated in the spread of propaganda. Some people call that disinformation, some people call that misinformation. I still call it propaganda because I'm old school with it. I don't want to forget because it actually isn't just about a misunderstanding of information, it is the purposeful manipulation. And we could go even further to say the purposeful manipulation by foreign actors upon our government and upon our society, the weaponization of our own histories. And lack of repair and reconciliation that has happened around, the occupation of native lands, of the enslavement of African peoples, of the internments of many different kinds of people, the forced migration and destruction of so many communities that we really haven't resolved appropriately in the United States. So that's all, ripe for and actually even I don't know if I'll say more important, but completely embedded and tied to that is just the you know despicable human rights abuses that are part of the economic organization that we live under in the United States. So just an incredible kind of like class exploitation and the concentration of power among the 1%, let's say. So we have all of these kinds of things that I think many people prior to scholars of the internet have talked about. And in fact, we're owed a huge debt to those scholars that have been writing about systems of power and inequality. And um, and we are also living in a moment where to talk about those things is actually to be rendered illegal, right? Or against the law, or to be banned, or to have your works or your books be banned. So um, we know that um, well, I just look at it this way, we were born into these packages, we were born into these circumstances, and all we can do is live a life to try and make sense of it and make a contribution in and of it because this is for us to do, right? This is the journey that we decided we wanted. So I don't, I think we might not have anticipated that in the US we would see such a dramatic collapse of things like freedom of speech and the First Amendment and freedom of assembly, which we are living right this very moment, and has been just not, obviously, um, those rights have not always been extended to people equally, but um, it's a heavy moment that I think people did anticipate would happen. What people have also anticipated, which maybe isn't as legible sometimes, because many of us, we talk about like the terrible things, but what we have to remember is that um, on the other side of these kinds of collapses, there's this incredible opportunity for us to imagine and enact the kinds of worlds we do want to live in, the kinds of communities, the kind of societies, the vision for how would we reorganize ourselves. And what we know is that the path we're on right now is not sustainable in many different ways of thinking about sustainability. And so we have this interesting opportunity that feels like a paradox, that I think is why something like your book festival and like getting us all in the room and like reading right now and thinking about history and other communities and countries and societies that have come through and imagined new ways of more egalitarian, rights-based social organization. I mean, this is actually here, and I'll just say, to take on the tech industry is to ultimately, to me, say we refuse the standardization and predictability of the human endeavor. We refuse that. We claim fully our agency and our imagination and our sense of possibility, and we will not capitulate to living under the regime of prediction and social organization that refuses the largesse of our collective genius to the majority and concentrates that among the hands of a few. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Mia. I kind of went
I
on a little tear there.
love that. That is exactly what we need to hear. That's exactly the words that we need right now in this moment. And when we started this event today, first thing I started with was letting people know at Women in AI Ethics, we do not center technology.
That's
There's
right.
so many people who think AI is just about the technology, to talk about the technology. How do we use technology? And that's the extent of the curiosity about this technology. We look at, and we've always looked at the human beings behind these technologies and people who are actively working to make these technologies more ethical, actively working to make sure that we are all protected, that we all benefit equitably. And somehow that gets lost in the narrative because we don't have those fancy, glitzy, multi-million dollar like campaigns to spend to as just this narrative, right? Like and they're just diminishing. Like so the human creativity constantly, the disdain that the tech industry has
That's
for
right.
for human beings is
Absolutely.
absolutely terrifying, and we're seeing it at such a global level, like at such a um, at a high level, at the national level, that it is truly terrifying. And this is why this is important. Just wanted you all to know to please do stay for the next session after this. I'll be sharing what our plan is for the new era that we are entering now, because the same old is not working anymore. We started in a very different place, as Dr. Noble just shared, but we have a plan for the future. We have a plan how we are going to continue to bring this community together, and the new iteration of Women in AI Ethics is going to be even more powerful, more
Love
impactful.
it.
So just yeah, we are not giving up. We are doubling down
That's
for
right. I
sure.
love
And
that.
this is our time. This is it. This is it. If not now, when?
We have a lot at stake. There is a lot at stake.
Yes.
So this is not a time for us to sit back and chill. This is a time for us to apply what we know. This is a time for us to hold our ground from these erasures. I love, one of the things I've always loved, Mia, about your work is so resonant because I also always, in my research centers and initiatives, we always foreground people. And in fact, we're always looking to see to what degree is technology undermining our humanity, and our sense of possibility and our rights. Um, and some people will say that we're just critics, right? Because that's what we do. That we're not, like these kind of like techno utopian kinds of folks. And I mean, I feel like this is part of the propaganda wars against humanists and social scientists, even in the academy, is that if we express concern and want a pause, that means somehow we're not forward thinking. We don't care about progress, right? Like the incredible stranglehold that Silicon Valley and Silicon corridors and academia have put on the way we should somehow foreground the tech at all cost. It's just like, to me, this is the space we cannot concede. We just cannot uh, um, reduce ourselves to those perspectives because besides all of the things that we know, that technology is a social practice, it's an economic practice, it's a political practice, it's made by people, it's got our values embedded. All right, we really understand that now. What we understand less is that the distribution of resource, the amount of capital, human and otherwise, that goes into experimentation upon people through these various technologies, is what we know. It's criminal in many ways, right? It's certainly like dangerous in other ways. Some people could say it's unethical, in the least damaging ways. But for sure, I think we have um, a tremendous amount at stake, and um, we cannot allow people to frame and name our community as purely critics who are just against tech, because I just don't think that's true. I mean, we don't think about the applications. First of all, most of us on this call and our colleagues are not funded to the tune of $30 billion. Like last week, the co-founder of OpenAI given $30 billion, $2 billion in one day just to make super general AI and not release it. I mean, no one's given us $2 billion in one day to try to make vaporware that we never released. I mean, I cannot. So, it's like it's so cynical the way in which resource gets deployed. Whereas, imagine the things, I mean, you and I know the things this community would try to heal and solve, the problems we would solve with those kinds of resources. But you have to have this narrative that the tech is somehow always about forward progress to justify that kind of, what I would say, criminal investment of resources and capital, and to allow for the rise of a venture capital model that is, or vulture capital, whatever you want to call it, that completely distorts our sense of value and what value is, and what we care about. So I think of our community of critics, if you will, as the most loving set of people I've ever worked with, to be honest, because I think we truly love humanity. We love our societies, we love our communities, and we care about the fundamental issues of the human condition, of the planet, of all of its inhabitants, of our children, of our mothers, our grandmothers, of the generations that will come, and not and and we should refuse uh, being mischaracterized as people who are not about forward progress. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Amen. I could not agree more. Just this narrative is so destructive and it's intentional by design. It's dismissing all criticism of an industry which chooses to consolidate wealth and power and resources for themselves. And the AGI is, for lack of a better word, I feel like it's such a massive con game because you can keep pouring money into that and they keep pouring more and more money and it keeps shifting. The goals keep shifting. We'll have it in tomorrow, we'll have it in 5 years, we'll have it in 10 years. And there's nobody, and even if it never comes to fruition, this AGI, billions of dollars have gone to all of these deep pockets. And what happens to the rest of humanity who can't even pay their bills? So therein lies the challenge, which is why this conversation is so important to have right now, is everything is connected. This is a structural, a systemic problem,
Absolutely.
right? It is about, we could talk, there were so many scholars who have come out and said that AI shifts power, and it has already shifted and concentrated power in the hands of a few. So my question for you is, as we look at your book and it's setting up, you have done so much research on this. Can we talk about just the education system? What role does that play? Because right now everybody is being sold on, and my pet peeve is this coding camps, coding camps. On one hand, they're pushing coding camps. Hey, everybody, 2-year-olds should learn coding. And on the other hand, they're busily automating away coders, right? They're busily automating away coding. So help us understand like how the education system plays a role in helping people become more aware and become more resilient in the use of these tools, or even understanding how these tools work.
Yeah, I mean, what a great question, especially right now when the administration has dismantled the Department of Education, when higher education is under massive threat right now. For people who are not paying close attention, I would just say it's absolutely imperative that people dial in to this moment of defunding education from K through higher ed. And so, what will that mean? That means we will have an even more narrow class of people who will have access to education. We will have a population that is even more vulnerable to propaganda because of the lack of opportunity to develop the critical thinking skills that you get to have when you're in an English class or humanities class or art history or like all of the kinds of things that, let's say, are not narrated as valuable as something like coding or engineering. But I bet you know, all of the, in fact, we know some of the most important people right now in this moment are historians, quite frankly. So I think you're absolutely right that there is this pressure, especially in academia, but also on K through 12, there has been a pressure, probably a solid 30 years. We could say of the STEM movement in education, which has devalued the social sciences, arts, and humanities and foregrounded science, technology, engineering, and math. Certainly, we want people that are literate. We want a math literate population, but that doesn't mean that we will make all of our decisions using math or engineering. And so I think that that has been a place of deep investment because corporate America has been interested in developing a pipeline of workers. So we understand what the impetus has been for those deep investments and for the most part of people to understand the federal government and state governments typically and municipal subsidize the interests of corporations in the society we live in this country. So, and you see that because we have things like the National Science Foundation and other kinds of federal agencies that fund some of the riskiest dimensions of STEM research, let's say, that gets offloaded onto public dollars, public taxpayers, so that corporations don't have to pay that. So we have this kind of complex environment where there have been deep investments in STEM. And again, I'm a STEM person. I have a PhD in a STEM field. And I also understand that that would not be as valuable to me in the kind of work I do had I not had a bachelor's and a master's in sociology and had I not had, deep exposure in ethnic studies and gender studies, right? So, and had my parents not both been artists, quite frankly, and that really shaping my worldview. So I think these are the kinds of things, like this kind of interdisciplinarity is really, really important. And you're right, the sending, I wrote about this in Algorithms of Oppression. I said, there was nothing to me more cynical than Google funding Black Girls Code. And I'm a super big fan of Black Girls Code. But I will say, you know, um, putting the onus back on Black girls for their faulty products and saying, well, it's because we don't have enough Black women and girls in the pipeline so that they can catch these problems. That is a very cynical read of the community. And so some of this is a way to offload responsibility onto marginalized communities, to underrepresented people, to say, well, you're not in the pipeline and therefore you're responsible for fixing these kind of massive systemic problems or corporate problems, corporate decision making, which even if we do like a close reading of people who work in AI and technology, we know that women are massively underrepresented, women of color even more underrepresented, like we're like a fraction of a fraction. And so, these are, you could have a reading of these as being, public relations projects across, the tech industry, multiple industries, STEM industries, and even with large language models and other kinds of new, like emerging forms of AI, eroding one's need to know how to code. I do think that there's something very valuable in understanding the logics of coding and the logics and the limits, because this is part of the problem again, that when you go back into a search engine, you go into large language model and you don't understand how you're getting the results that you're getting, it means that you are much more vulnerable to trusting those things. And so this is one of the reasons why I think, there's still a place for us to have this knowledge, but um, at the end of the day, it's really about where the rubber meets the road, where people get jobs, where people have opportunity or not. And it does feel a little bit, I think you're right, like, I was of the generation where, a lot of boys in my high school were sent to, they took these shop classes where they learned how to work on cars so they could be mechanics, because I went to a working class high school. And they learned how to do, work with their hands. And then, 5 years later, the cars were all tech and you didn't like replace the carburetor in quite the same way you did 5 years before, right? So this kind of like moving goalposts also and keeping people entrenched in like the wave behind is also part of this system of dynamics that we're working with.
This is a tsunami of so many different challenges just build up to this like teeny small cracks showing, and now that it's completely devastating. I wrote down something in chat which is always stuck with me, and I cannot take credit for this, but it's just a privatization of profits and socialization of costs, right? You said it becomes user error, it becomes users' responsibilities. And the reason we are not able to we end up being critics or skeptics is because just flood of these flawed and biased and racist and sexist AI tools that are coming up, our products that are being unleashed and tested on us is, like you said, it's criminal. And we are constantly in the position of having to react because we don't have control over the flood incoming. There's no like gateway. And then we are looking at all of these different tools. This is harmful, this is harmful. So we end up being in the position of doing the unpaid work of constantly addressing those harms. We ourselves are a volunteer-led organization, and it gets exhausting day after day, just
Yeah.
keeping on top of all of these harms happening at the same time. People are so enamored by the technology and just this is cool, this picture or what have you. So can you talk a little bit more about like the education system that it is being, and you alluded to that in a little somewhat in your previous comment, but the dangers of privatization of public goods like universities,
Oh, yeah.
schools, and libraries. Given this current state of politics as the Department of Education is dismantled, like what is the consequence of that? Like what does it mean for the future? On one hand, like supposedly we care so much about our children and we are going to make everybody learn coding, but at the same time, we are
Yeah,
basically reducing all of those opportunities. So where do you see the impact on the
yeah.
current and future generation?
Well, this has been a very big issue in California right now where I live because we have a lot of institutions that are ripe for transfers of wealth from the public good to Silicon Valley companies. And so we have, for example, the California State University system. Um, Leadership administration just signed a big contract with OpenAI, and this idea of like every student and faculty and staff member has license to use the technology, and that there's an increasing pressure upon faculty and students to use large language models in their like educational delivery. I'm not sure how you do that when you're like teaching theater or fine arts, or like it's a real arrogance about the necessity of some of these kinds of things universally across every discipline. But we could bookmark that and save that for another time. All right. So we have seen this again and again, whether it's hardware companies or I mean, we can go back to Microsoft, at the early days of Microsoft, and like getting these kind of like ubiquitous licensing deals across corporate America and across education. And these are steady streams of like clientele for companies. So they also reshape what those public goods look like. So anybody here who's ever, let's say, had to live under a Salesforce or SAP regime because that got introduced in the company that you work in, and now all of a sudden you can't get anything done, you can't get a check cut to anybody. The like CRM model is like applied in the context of like admissions for your university or your like these logics that absolutely do not fit into the mission and values of public institutions. I mean, we're seeing this right now at the federal government. I mean, we're seeing people come in and apply models with just a complete ignorance of what the federal government does, how it delivers services and goods to, 330 million people in the United States, and thinking, I guess she could run a Python script somehow and like fix it, make it more efficient. So these are complete absurdities. And what we are witnessing is the dismantling of very important public institutions with these logics. So we've got a lot of work to do. We have to be supporting state and federal workers, government workers. Educators are almost always government workers, except at public or at private institutions. Um, but they still probably fund a lot of people in those private institutions on public dollars, grants, and so forth. So it's very, very important that we have all eyes on public goods right now. What I saw back in the 2016, we saw during that administration the largest transfer of public wealth into private hands in the history of the United States. And what we're experiencing right now is going to far eclipse that. So, because now it's going to touch things like Medicare and Social Security. There's no question that everybody has a stake in it. And I actually don't think that most parents or people who are caregivers to children, especially anyone who has gone to college or had affordable college, whether it's community college, um, trade school, trade union, all the way through higher education and advanced degrees and specialized degrees, who would turn around and say, I don't want that opportunity for the next generation, right? So we've got to get very creative in these institutions. We're doing that right now at UCLA. We are facing these incredible austerity measures, and we are trying to figure out ways to reinvent our work. But I will tell you that there are a lot of us who are not going to stop educating people. And my friends in the university and I, we're always having our little sidebar. And I'm like, look, even if they try to shut down UCLA or the UC system, I'm ready for the headline that says America's professors refuse to stop educating students, and we will educate them on the yard, in the street, wherever we have to do it, because we are totally committed to that, even if the infrastructure continues to break. So, what I hope that people listening, in your communities outside of academia or outside of, corporate America, that you will be talking to your neighbors, to your family members, to your friends about what is happening, what is breaking, what is so incredibly beloved and important to our society, and not and connect these dots. Quite frankly, it's only a matter of, we've already seen the professors, and the teachers are already have been out in the streets in the last few weeks. I think that's going to become much more intense, because these systems they're fragile and they can break, and we cannot let that happen.
Amen. Oh my gosh, you have no idea how much I needed to hear that. Thank you. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
joining us. I have so many more questions for you, but I'm going to hold off because we are running
Okay.
out of time.
All right, my
But we
friend.
do want to, oh, it's such a pleasure to see you and meet you. I have some questions about AS Love, and I would love for folks to follow up with you on that, on your
Okay.
LinkedIn page, on your author page. Please, everybody, run out and buy this book if you don't have it already.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And we have to support each other and be there for each other. I know it's super late for you right now, but if
It's
you're
okay.
able to stay with us as I share where we are headed over the next 10 to 15 minutes, I would love
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
But I completely understand if you're not able. So thank
No,
you so much from the bottom
thanks.
of my heart.
Thanks, Mia. And thanks to
Thank
everyone. What a wonderful
you.
organization you lead. And what an honor to be here. Thanks, everyone.
We are honored. Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, folks, we are running behind schedule. And again, such a fantastic human being, brilliance and empathy all bundled into one. Uh, I'm very excited that I'll stop recording.